As the nation pauses to remember the lives lost on 9/11, it does so reflecting as it did then during a time of war. Ceremonies were held at Ground Zero here in New York City, attracting hundreds of people from across the country. A moment of silence was held twice to mark the time that each plane crashed into the towers. And in Washington, President Obama marked the anniversary with observances at the White House as well as the Pentagon. Joining us in remembrance of the events of 9/11 is former New York City Deputy Mayor Rudy Washington, who helped govern the city in the immediate aftermath of the attacks, and U.S. Naval Reserve Commander Patrick Burns, who is joining us from Washington, D.C. Good day to both of you, and thank you so much for taking some time with us. Rudy, let me start with you. As we just mentioned in the interview, and we of course know you were Deputy Mayor at the time of the 9/11 attacks, and you ran the city for a period of time right after the attacks. I not so much want to go back and revisit the experience then, but talk about sort of the chaos, what happened, what didn't happen then, that would be better now because of changes since 2001.
Well, I haven't had the opportunity to really look at what the fire department and police department has done in terms of their communications. I know there was a lot of money appropriated, and as of '08, it wasn't spent or it wasn't completed, so I don't know where that project is. One of the major problems we had that day was communications. A lot of the repeater services were on top of the World Trade Center, and if you can imagine 500 people trying to talk at once and clashing and not knowing who's speaking, that was very problematic for us.
Did you know right away, and when I say you, I mean the city government administrators, did you know right away what had to get better in the event that, God forbid, something like this would ever happen again?
Well, that was probably the major one, communications. Making sure that in the event of something as catastrophic as 9/11 happening again, that our first responders can communicate in an orderly fashion and orders can get out clearly and people understand them.
And Patrick, you know, I think Rudy raised a very, very good point, and that is that communication seemed to fail on a number of levels, from intelligence to administration, all kinds of things. Was that the biggest problem then, and have we fixed it now?
That was, I think, by far the biggest problem, and what I believe saved us on 9/11 was practicing and drilling. And what I mean by that is, for years, whether it was a Fleet Week event or the President's International Naval Review or UN 50, over 40 federal, state, and law enforcement agencies would come together and drill and red team what could go wrong, and that was largely led by Rudy Washington, the deputy mayor. So when 9/11 happened, we had drilled and worked together, and everyone knew each other. So face-to-face communication was easy because everyone knew each other.
That was the positive part, Patrick.
That's really, yeah.
Because I was able to call Admiral Natter on the spot. I had just finished, I don't know, Patrick, if you went on that training exercise the week before 9/11 when we went out of Norfolk. But as Patrick said, leading up to 9/11, we had just finished International Naval Review, and we had planned, what, Patrick, I believe a year and a half, 2 years out on that, yes. And had drilled down into this and how would we respond and all the scenarios that could go wrong, and you know, it involved all of the government agencies.
So here's the question, Patrick. I'll pose it to you, but Rudy, I do want you to weigh in, and that is, are we safer today? Is America safer today, 12 years after 9/11?
Debbie, I'd have to say we're safer. We've made pretty good strides domestically and internationally. I think we're in a more dangerous world, but we've managed to become safer, and I really put my money on the American people. You know, we've spent all this money, but when it comes down to it, it's American citizens that stopped the sneaker bomber. It's American citizens that stopped the underwear bomber. It's American citizens who stopped the Times Square bomber. The public is aware. If they see something, they say something. Before 9/11, we were all told if there's a hijacking, just be calm and the professionals will come in and save the day. Now I think the public knows if they see something, they'll do something.
And you know, Rudy, I would agree with Patrick. We are safer, but it's been at a bit of a cost, and some of that has been our privacy. Of course,
Yes.
all the controversies that we're going through right now with the surveillance being conducted by the NSA is a direct result of 9/11. And is that a cost worth paying to be safer?
Well, I'm someone from the Benjamin Franklin School, and I believe if you surrender your freedom, you deserve neither liberty or freedom. So I'm not on board with eavesdropping on Americans and looking at everybody's emails. I don't know how Patrick feels about that, but I think that gets a bit problematic. I think President Bush had it right with the Patriot Act, where we were looking at international calls. How we got to looking at all Americans, I don't know when we took that leap. And now you don't even know what to believe. Like you hear about them reading all your emails. So that becomes a bit problematic. I'm more concerned because on a day like today, when there's a bit of melancholy that hits a lot of people, what hits me is vigilance. Last year, this very day, when Benghazi happened, I knew what it was. I was with Mayor Giuliani. I'll be with him tonight. We'll be having dinner. And instantly, we knew what it was. So they could talk about some film or whatever, but we knew exactly what it was. And that's what I worry about. As Patrick said, technologically, we're better prepared. We can detect more evil stuff. However, we have a very porous border in the South that anybody can walk anything across. Sarin gas has been on the move for a year. It could easily have been walked across the border and driven north. So when I hear about attacks on Syria and nobody's thought about the fallout, I get very concerned because that fallout could very well be right here. Everybody likes to talk about the fallout being in Africa or Europe somewhere. No, what 9/11 taught me is, that surreal moment when you don't believe this is happening, it can't happen.
And that's a perfect segue to the other thing that I want us to be sure and talk about, Patrick, and that is who exactly is our enemy now. President Bush declared that President Obama declared that we had cut the head off of al-Qaeda. Is al-Qaeda still our main threat? And it certainly can't be in the same fashion that it was 12 years ago.
I think people lose the larger point of the enemy. I said we're in a more dangerous world. What I meant by that was during the Cold War, we had mutual assured destruction when both parties involved believed in life and the value of life and the sanctity of life, and nobody wanted to destroy each other. The new enemy is an idealism, a philosophy that life doesn't have value. People that are willing to kill themselves and martyr themselves for a cause are absolutely contrary to how we think, how Western culture thinks, how Americans think about life. And I don't think we've really come to terms with how to deal with that. You can attack individuals, but until you get rid of that philosophy, until you get rid of that belief that life has no value and I'm willing to martyr myself and blow myself up, we have an amazing threat on our hands.
It really is a scary proposition. And it's been 12 years, which seems like in some ways almost yesterday, but in some ways seems like a lifetime ago. How fresh are those memories of that time?
Well, for me, Debbie, as Pat has watched me and been by my side a couple of times when I've gone through just about 3 days a week. I wake up, and surgeries and procedures and pain in my body reminds me, because 30 seconds one way or the other, I'm not sitting here. And I wouldn't have been at any of my kids' graduation for high school, college, and everything else. I mean, so, I'm reminded weekly, just by the pains from what I went through in terms of suffering physically. So it stays in the forefront of my mind. I have a different perspective than a lot of people on this, simply because, like I said, I was there. I was underneath the building when it started to drop. And Patrick and we hung that flag together. And, you walk amongst the dead. It's totally different. So I have a vigilance that drops on me on 9/11, almost a hypervigilance as opposed to melancholy. So, it's like yesterday.
You know, it's interesting, Patrick, this day has come to mean gradually over time something different in these last 12 years. What does September 11th mean to you now?
Well, Debbie, this is the second time I've agreed to speak publicly, and I'm doing this because the young interns in our office, they barely remember this, and it's important that people understand. They remain vigilant. They understand the threat hasn't gone away. And, you know, as Rudy was alluding to, it's also important to me to be here to talk to you because these people that know what happened are leaving us. Richie Shear, the Director of Office of Emergency Management, has passed away. Admiral Bennis, the Coast Guard Admiral of the Port, is gone. Mike Handy, the Director of Veterans Affairs, is gone. John Hartman, Army Corps of Engineers, they've all passed away. And there's no one here to tell their story or convey what we need to do and how vigilant we need to remain.
Indeed. We'll have to leave it right there. Rudy Washington, as always, we thank you. Thank you, Patrick Burns, for joining us.
Thank you, Debbie.
We do appreciate it. And this is Arise America.